So to quickly introduce our panelists, I think many of you know both of them, but we have Carolyn Richmond from Fox-Rothschild and Sarah Diehl from Empowered Hospitality. Both have been great partners of Opus, and so we're incredibly honored to have them share their insights with all of you. So I will let them each introduce themselves with a little bit about their background.
Thank you for having us. My name is Sarah Diehl. I'm the founder and principal of Empowered Hospitality, which is an HR consulting and recruiting firm focusing in the hospitality industry. So we work with restaurant groups of all sizes, from moms and pops to 1,000+ employee organizations, supporting them with every aspect of their HR and talent needs. My background originally is actually in hospitality operations, which I did with Hillstone Restaurant Group before getting into HR and training. So I very much appreciate both sides of the coin when it comes to managing HR in a restaurant environment. And I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. And I think what you naturally see, but why we brought these two people together, is that you really get to a sense of the lay of the land, but also how to make sense of it and put into practice. And so in these conversations that we're having today, you'll see both sides. And I think this will hopefully really ground, what can you do with this, right? And like, what can you do going forward? So we're very excited to have both of them on today. So thank you for everybody who added their top burning question. One of the things that we did was took a look at what was really top of mind for people and craft this discussion so that we're answering the questions there. And so based off of your feedback, what we're going to be spending most of our time is around these two trends, really around retention, which is a funny one because I know the topic was more on compliance, but it was really interesting to hear how so much of that is also related to like, how do we retain our employees? Because that is such a burning problem for so many of you out there. And so we'll really talk about that, how it relates across generations, how does that impact your business and from a benefits perspective, and really grounded around like the practicalities of some of the things that you guys are all thinking through. The second is around the FLSA, excuse me, and really the topics around like wage and hour, fair work week, a lot of things that have been changing, of recent dates. And then the last, I think we'll carve out about 10 minutes where we can talk about some other topics that are very much top of mind, things like joint employment, conversations around like unions and hospitality, et cetera, and obviously open it up for everybody here to discuss anything that is not covered. So with that, let's kick it off with the topic around retention. I'm going to kick it off to you, Sarah. What are you seeing these days in terms of what our businesses are thinking about and what are they addressing?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a really, really big question. So I think the first thing to say is that retention and staffing is a universal challenge that all businesses are talking about these days. We earlier were actually talking about the James Beard Foundation's 2023 industry report, which just came out today. And it said a lot about how high on the list of priorities staffing and retention really is. 21% of respondents said that labor costs were their top concern for 2023. And obviously, we know that goes along with turnover. It goes along with being short-staffed because of overtime costs and all of those other things, and compliance very much as well when it comes to fines and legal costs. So I think what we're seeing is a lot of our clients are asking about benefits specifically. And I think that's because, one, benefits is a fairly new focus, I would say, within the employee base within hospitality. It wasn't, in my mind, as much of a priority for employees pre-pandemic as it is now. And so it's a new hot topic and something that's very complex and difficult to navigate if you don't have that expertise or prior experience. So, benefits, it's a common question. whether or not benefits actually influence retention more than other factors is really a question in my mind, and I would say probably not. The things that employees really seem to value more than that, and based on feedback and surveys of the industry, are things like career development, things like being part of an inclusive and a psychologically safe environment, things like having a predictable schedule, things like having reliable compensation, like your payroll is accurate, never mind having creative perks and benefits. So we really like to think about retention as more of a holistic picture rather than being driven by one particular factor or another. It's really about meeting the employee where they're at and bringing a lot of different value to the table for them to fit their personal needs. So, having a variety of benefits that employees can choose from, having an environment that welcomes people from all different walks of life and perspectives, and really catering to that diversity rather than providing some very cookie cutter set of HR offerings, which may not work for everyone. And I think that just to build off of that, the tipping of the scales that really has happened in the past couple of years has prompted, I think, a really positive outpouring of interest from employers in learning how to be a great workplace, learning how to offer benefits, learning how to introduce some of these learning and development programs that they maybe didn't have. So what we are seeing as a general trend from within our client base is there's just a lot more interest in what employees need to really thrive at work and how employers can do better by their employees, which is, it's music to our ears as HR practitioners. It's just the question of how to do it that really is challenging for a lot of operators.
And just to clarify your point, Sarah, you mentioned that you're seeing some of this inclusivity, the safe space being very important. Is this in lieu of benefits? Is this in addition to like what is core benefits? How are you really seeing like the balance between where the focus should be?
Yeah, I'd say in addition to, but without that fundamental positive culture and that sense of safety, none of the other stuff matters. So, I think what we see sometimes is business looking for a band-aid solution to turnover and saying, what one thing can I do to stop my employees from leaving? And it's never that simple. It's always more about taking a look at how your employees are feeling and how they feel, particularly about the culture and the growth opportunities they have, and addressing those in a more holistic way.
Yeah. Have you seen differences in needs across? We speak a lot about Gen Z, and that being the majority of the workforce, it makes a lot of sense. But you also talk about diversity in a lot of different factors. And so, are there certain considerations that businesses should keep top of mind in terms of creating that safe space? And what would be some of your recommendations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so yes, every employee has different needs. Some of the things, there are some really great solutions that businesses have been implementing more and more often, things like mental health solutions or employee assistance programs that actually create a safe space outside of the four walls of the business for employees to reach out to. But in terms of how do employers create that space internally, obviously, I think there's a lot of value in having an HR department or someone who can field those concerns and who is somewhat impartial or apart from the operation itself. But a lot of it, I would say, is the values that the leadership team of a company preaches. And if the leadership team preaches and also practices welcoming feedback, that goes an incredibly long way. And we've also been seeing a lot more interest in things like employee sentiment surveys. So something that we almost never used to see in hospitality, but I think there's more embracing of tools like that will actually give you a really authentic view of what your employees value or what they feel is missing within their workplace.
Those are really great suggestions, and I might be making an assumption, but they also seem to be pretty cost effective relative to maybe offering a brand new benefit. And a couple of questions that I remember seeing is how do you balance, like kind of the ROI of like offering different benefits, or putting in programs in place, especially when you still are seeing high turnover. And so, what are some things that you would think about in terms of how do you create the right balance?
Yeah, I would say a lot of the benefits or the kind of environmental factors that matter the most are free. I was just actually talking to a longtime client of ours and a friend who has a very reputable restaurant group in Philadelphia. And she was saying that the most impactful things when she was first starting her business 25 years ago were those cultural things. It really had nothing to do with, investing in robust benefit program or 401k or things like that. It was about employees feeling like they could talk to her if they had concerns, employees feeling like they had decision making authority for things that impacted their job, certainly feeling like employees or people of all different backgrounds were welcomed and supported there. So I would say, categorically, probably the things that matter most to people are fairly low cost for employers, but high effort to implement.
That's great to hear, and I think that gives some folks some really tangible ideas of what they can use. This is a little bit of shifting of gears, but another thing that has been sort of trending topic among the Gen Z is around the quiet quitting or those who just call out, right, and don't give a lot of accommodations. What are some strategies from like a retention standpoint have you seen work or to help address that?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say from an HR perspective, and then I think there's also a policy and
Mm-hmm.
consistency element that would be interesting to hear Carolyn's thoughts on. But I would say that quiet quitting is an indication of low engagement. So I would argue that the indicator of someone not showing up for work is really telling you something about the work environment you created, in that they don't feel accountable, they don't feel invested, they don't feel like it impacts anyone personally when they don't show up for work. So the first place I would look as an HR professional is I would look at the policy and also say, have you set a clear set of guidelines around attendance? Because there's an element of enforcing reliability that really impacts your high performing employees. You have to think about, how they feel when 20% of the shift call out last minute and they're left, working the floor without a lot of support. And then also think about what that indicates. So if you have people calling out, does it mean that they're maybe not happy or not feeling fulfilled or motivated at work? Yeah, so quiet quitting is when you're actually showing up to work, but you're not invested in what you're doing. So, and there are a lot of different ways to look at it. A lot of people talk about it as continuing to collect a paycheck while not doing the work that is expected of you, just as an example, or doing the bare minimum. Um, I think that quiet quitting, actually, in my experience, is a little less common in hospitality because it's a little tough to show up and like not actually do the job if you're serving tables in a restaurant. But I could see it with certain other roles, corporate roles, or maybe in restaurants where there isn't as much oversight or accountability potentially. Yeah. Yeah. There's a philosophy that we could borrow from other industries, which is hire slow, fire fast. And I really think there's a lot of truth to that. And, we tend to put band aids on situations when we're short staffed in hospitality. And you can say better than I, Carolyn, but that does not usually work out to your advantage. Yeah, I think there are really two larger dynamics that I'm seeing. And one is how do we do more with less from a labor perspective? And the other is how do we really cultivate and nurture the talent that we do have? And you really have to do both of those things to be successful right now and to not have labor be that much of a pain point as it is for so many businesses.
Thank you. These are really great, like I think discussion points that really emphasizes it's not just oh how can you improve retention, but why it's so critical, right? And it's worth the hard work because I think sometimes culture and creating that safe space feels or can feel very nebulous, but it's doing the hard work to get there, and it reaps so many other downstream benefits.
Mhm.
I'm going to pause here. Does anybody have any questions that they would want to come in live or chat before we move on to the next topic? I'm going to give it.
There's a question in the chat, if I can address it, from
Yes.
Kev. Just says that, was I saying that typical benefits are not as key to talent acquisition and retention as some purport? Instead, quality of life benefits, culture, happiness, etc., are more important. And I think the answer to that, I would argue, is yes. But there are a lot of caveats there. But you do see that benefit participation is very low in our industry. It's usually around 10 to 15% of employees, if that, and on a good day, that actually sign up for traditional medical benefits. So if you're thinking about really how to target the majority of your employees and create an environment that they value, I would say typical benefits are not the place to focus. Unfortunately, many businesses do have to, which, Carolyn would speak to the legal requirements around the Affordable Care Act. But from a bang for your buck perspective, I would say traditional benefits are really not the place to focus.
That's a great point. Well, let's shift gears. So, like we talked a lot about retention, but now let's talk about that money part of it. Um, Caroline, I'll kick it off to you. What are the current hot topics in wage and hour issues that you're seeing today? And, I'll cap you at 5 minutes for now, but I'm sure you can go on for a long time. I think you touched on this, but just to confirm, can you expand on the 80/20/30 rule? Like, which of these components? Thank you for explaining that. It was illuminating for me too. Uh, we have a couple of questions here that I think is good, and then I want to switch gears and then talk about the flip side of it, which is, well, what do businesses do about this, right? And but before we get there, uh, yeah,
Yeah, I want to, this is a topic I'm very passionate about. So I want to jump into, because I saw Kev's question as well about maybe you can't trust your payroll, but could you trust your sophisticated HRIS or POS system? And the answer is really no for all of them. When we first start with a new relationship, we always do a compliance audit. And I would just say, and again, not to mention specific names, but virtually every single platform we review has compliance issues. And there may be things that the system can automate that haven't been set up properly. Or to Carolyn's point, it might be actually more of a circumstantial issue, like an employee working at two different locations that are part of the same company that the payroll system doesn't know about. So there's always has to be a level of human oversight to make sure that the system itself is doing what it's supposed to do.
thanks for sharing that. Sarah, do you have any other strategies that you recommend in terms of how do you get a handle of your wage and hour across your employees? Like, what do you recommend or guide folks
I
to
was
do?
listening to Carolyn and just thinking how overwhelming this all is, to be honest with you. And literally my full-time job is keeping up with all of this, and it's still overwhelming. So I think it's more important than ever to have support from a true labor attorney and HR professional. I could not agree more with Carolyn. We, come in and start working with really well-intentioned employers all the time. And good intentions only go so far when it comes to just, inadvertently violating one of these requirements. So I would say, but I think there are a lot of places you can get information these days. So I think the good news is, as frequently as things are changing, there are a lot of ways you can learn about the requirements, whether it's, following a newsletter like what Carolyn and her team put out, or joining webinars like this. I do think that perpetual exercise of just educating yourself and staying up to date is really important, and having also friends and colleagues in the industry that you can share information with. Especially in HR. I've always found that incredibly helpful, because there might have been an article that I missed last week and one of my colleagues might have read it, and it's from them that I learned that important piece of information. So the more information you can absorb from credible sources, I would say the better positioned you'll be. I want to add one thing that I think is important, which is, yes, I totally agree. All of those are important. When do these typically make it across a plaintiff's attorney's desk? A lot of these things start because employees feel like they've been taken advantage of or wrongfully terminated or discriminated against or harassed. And we have the most numerous discrimination and harassment claims of any industry in the country in hospitality. But we also have employees who may not understand why they're being terminated. And they might say, maybe it's because of how I look, or maybe it's because of the language I speak or where I come from. And so I would just say, when we see within our immediate community of clients and colleagues here in New York City, when we see things turn into lawsuits, more often than not, yes, the wage and hour issues are actually the more substantive issues from a cost perspective. But why this issue started in the first place was that someone didn't understand why they were being terminated, and they, for deliberately or not, they made it about, I'm being treated unfairly. So that's where, again, having an HR resource or just following a progressive discipline process is incredibly important, because if you're firing people left and right without a lot of explanation, that gives rise to a lot of these legal issues.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up what is like the root cause, right? And like, let's not try to solve the symptom, but really address like the underlying issue there.
Yeah, it's
Um,
all
s-
about culture, really. It's really
mhm.
about, does someone feel like they understand the terms of their employment? Do they feel appreciated? Do they feel like they understand what the rules are in their workplace? That's 99% of it.
That's good. Yeah. I would say before you start, I want to open up, make sure that people know, like, at the last 10 minutes, we can also address anybody else's questions. And there's a couple that haven't been addressed, but as they think about it and get into the chat, why don't you address unions? Because I know that has been top of mind.
There was a question in the chat earlier about whether giving employees the authority to weigh in on things in their workplace might feed into unionization. And I would just say, the opposite, actually, in my opinion, is that employees often seek out unionization as a way to have a voice and to have authority. So if they feel they don't have that, that may prompt them to kind of seek other means of doing so. And I think, just to specify, authority doesn't necessarily mean that employees need to run your business or that they need to make decisions that will like materially impact the health of the company that you're running. What that does mean is the things that impact their experience at work should be things that they feel they have input on.
This is a little bit tangential, but I think when you think about engagement, uh, how do you think about engagement within the restaurant walls versus outside? And maybe even about like, how do you compensate if there are work related activities like training, for instance, that happens outside of like the walls of the restaurant? Um, are there things that they should think about? Yeah. Is there a law?
I would also, just bringing the retention lens back to this, also thinking about whether it's possible to just invest in that kind of training and compensate your employees for it, whether or not it's actually required, whether or not the training is mandated, whether or not their presence is mandated. Going above and beyond for something like that can really make a difference.
Thank you. So we have basically about time. So I'm going to quickly just reshare the last slide here to close us out. I think just to first thank you, Sarah and Carolyn. This was amazing. I think a ton of content, a lot of really actionable takeaways for everyone. So just wanted, on behalf of everybody here, just say thank you for that. For everybody else who has been tuning in, thank you for participating and asking questions. We will have a written recap next week for everybody to help summarize a lot of the content that was discussed here. I also want to make a plug for next month. We do these monthly. It is just to provide access for more insights and tools and tips for those in the hospitality and restaurant industry. Next month, and maybe some even further on, it's going to be around leadership and management. I think it was touched upon here, but it's so core to making sure that these laws and policies that you have really reach and get implemented through consistently. And so there's a lot to expand on from there. I think just like what Carolyn has said, like the way to stay up to date is to sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. There'll be a lot of really good stuff that we'll be able to send out, and it goes straight into your inbox. And then lastly, both of these speakers here today have graciously offered to answer any follow-up questions that you have. And so we're providing their contact information there. And so feel free to reach out to them directly. And with that, just say, I'm going to wrap it up, and thanks again. Have a good day.